Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 22 of season 3. My name is Lee. I am in Perth. Joining me today is my trusty co-host Vikas, back in the country.
Yes, back in the country. Still a little jet lagged. So if I start talking and slurring my speech, that's just the effects of traveling for the last
I'll
28
make a
hours.
bad argument.
No, that's just me normally.
And you heard the dulcet tones of Tim in Victoria.
Hello.
All right, so this week there's lots that we could talk about. We had half a dozen things. 18C, David Lighthill being a troll. There's bikini bans. But this week we're going to talk about two sort of key things that have come up in the last couple of weeks. So we've got the Nauru files, so revelations or reports from the Guardian newspaper discussing the treatment of children, in particular in the Nauru concentration camp, for lack of a better phrase.
Ouch!
And there's also the Gary Johnson making a suggestion of having a carbon tax to do with climate change. So maybe we'll start with that one first because it'll be a bit zingy, be a bit fun. Because Gary Johnson being the warmly loved, universally praised Libertarian Party candidate.
Yeah,
yeah. In the last, I think 2 or 3 days, he suggested that the best way to deal with climate change is through a carbon tax. For obvious political reasons in Australia, that's going to prove to be a hard case to sell. But what are your thoughts, gentlemen?
If it's a hard case to sell in Australia, it is it's monumentally impossible in the United States. What I've seen a lot of people do is take this 5-minute Learn Liberty clip from the Free to Choose series, where basically Milton Friedman talks about smoke coming out of a factory. And like, if you wanted to take the damage from that smoke from the factory does, you would put a tax on pollution and basically use that to price in that factor, that externality. Now, from an economics perspective, that makes absolute sense. But the thing is, that's where they stop the clip, and this is what pisses me off, because the entire series was about, private costs versus public costs. And he goes on to explain that this actually is a good system if there's public damage, damage to society as a whole. If you can actually prove that damage is done to an individual, the best option then becomes insurance, because it's a risk pool. If you can show that climate change damages a specific person, in which case the damage is real and quantifiable and large enough that that it does actually warrant an externality, then insurance is the way to go. So I hate the fact that this clip that's being shown only goes halfway through his explanation.
Well, I think that Murray Rothbard's article, which I can't remember the name, it's about water air pollution, which basically says that pollution on another property, you treat it as a trespass, and take action against the person who's doing the pollution and seek a remedy that way. So you don't need to have a state-involved societal solution. You just need to have...
That's actually much more extreme than anything Milton Friedman proposed.
Yeah. I mean, also when it comes to climate change, you'd have massive difficulties proving causation. So,
exactly. Well, that's the whole thing. Like, looking at, if we took that Rothbardian approach, then it would be very difficult to prove that there is actual damage.
So from the economics perspective...
hang on. Can we just go back to that? How do you think so? I have no strong feelings about the science of climate change. For the benefit of this discussion, we'll just say it's happening, and it's human induced. So let's just, for the purpose of the discussion, let's just assume that's the case. So say carbon dioxide melts the polar ice caps or whatever, and countries get flooded. The sea levels rise. How can you say it'd be hard to prove that damage has been caused when the sea level rises?
That's not going to happen all of a sudden. That's not going to happen the day after tomorrow.
Sure, but there's a real cost that people would have to bear to deal with that under a Rothbardian system. somebody should be held accountable for that by being sued. But how do you're going to sue everybody in the world that produces carbon dioxide? Like, how could you possibly prove causation aside from literally suing the entire world?
And I wish Zee was here because he would actually point out there's numerous problems with the Rothbardian approach anyway. Because firstly, so the Rothbardian approach is actually by far the more expensive and possibly more invasive way of dealing with it. Because if you treat pollution as trespass, there is a cost to defending yourself in the court. And basically, if you think that organizations won't bankroll huge suits against energy companies, then you're sadly mistaken. So the Rothbardian approach would deal with, I mean, it's just like what happens with ambulance chases, right? And tort law. You just get all of that, bottom feeder legal type of people just throwing out every possible case they can and just forcing crap tons and crap tons of anti-litigation sort of.
So the government needs. So you think the better solution is for the government to impose just a penalty on behalf of everyone who could potentially be harmed?
You know what? Financially, the Rothbardian approach you suggested would be would be more expensive than the tax. The tax would be cheaper than what you're suggesting. What Friedman suggested would be even cheaper still if you treat it like insurance.
But it's compulsory insurance.
Would it be compulsory? I'm not sure.
Carbon tax is compulsory.
No. I'm not. The carbon tax is not an insurance system. Carbon tax is a tax. That's collected by government. What I'm saying is, if you treat the problem like insurance, let's say there is a clear and imminent, issue, then people should be insuring themselves against this potential harm. I'm not. What I'm suggesting is not at all on a public.
Well, elaborate a bit further on how does this insurance work?
Okay, so like any other insurance, you're creating a risk pool, right? Anyone who wants to purchase insurance against climate change would purchase into that risk pool, and they're the only ones that would be paid out.
If there was any actual damage.
If there was any actual damage, yes.
Okay. I mean, I guess. I guess I haven't thought about this.
The reason why I like the Rothbardian trespass approach is because you have to show that climate change has actually caused some form of damage, which is very difficult to prove. I mean, there is hardly at the moment any evidence that climate change is adversely affecting things.
That doesn't matter. You're still defending yourself constantly against suits. Yeah.
Well, everyone can sue anybody at any time, but a lot of them a lot of these suits get thrown out as frivolous before they have the potential to cause real grave damages.
You still have to pay for a lawyer to file counterclaims before you can even get a case thrown out. You still have to pay for a lawyer to go there and basically argue that this is a frivolous suit. So, I mean, this is the problem I have with Rothbardian approaches to things. The courts handle it. Yeah, the courts do, but they're inefficient and they're expensive. So as soon as you start saying take it to court, things become very expensive very fast.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe a counterpoint to that might be that, say we had a common law system, it's quite possible that there would be a system that would evolve to sort of deal with frivolous suits before they become expensive. So,
sure.
So there's the whole anti-SLAPP Act thing in the US, where essentially it's legislation that's designed to kind of make it easier to have lawsuits thrown out before it gets really expensive. And so there's I can't remember exactly how it works, but essentially there's a threshold that you have to prove to the court before your suit can go forward.
Correct.
So it's possible that if you had a truly private system with a Rothbardian approach to
but you got to
environmental damage.
But you got to remember, Rothbardians oppose acts like that.
Sure, yeah. So, but I'm saying in a common law system. So, say you had, courts would get to the point where, obviously their customers are spending a fortune in legal fees, they might get together and say, look, this is going to be the premise for which we're going to work from, which essentially does the same thing. So, I mean, that's a possibility. It's always a bit of a counterfactual. Like, what would it be like if we lived in a completely different society? But
yeah.
So it's I mean, as it is, I mean, I don't think it's completely unreasonable to get back to the original topic, which is Gary Johnson making this thing, and maybe we can talk a bit about like where this puts him as a candidate.
It puts him okay. To be perfectly honest, it makes him a very shit libertarian, and I have no problem saying that. I like Gary Johnson, but on this particular policy, I think he's chosen a policy that is much more akin to what the Democrats would put out or what the Greens would put out. It is not a very libertarian position. Let's take, even if you accept that climate change is a problem, if you accept that climate change is a problem, which you should, then your position doesn't necessarily, as a libertarian, have to be that the government needs to step in and involve. In this case, I would have argued maybe ending the corn subsidies is a good way to starting to deal with climate change. Maybe ending ag subsidies is a very good way as well. Also, things like, those various land tax exemptions that they hand out to oil companies specifically. Those would be good ones to get rid of as well. So I would have started from a position of, hey, let's end the subsidies towards fossil fuel. Then basically said, look, the private sector is best placed to, if this pollution is a bad thing, the private sector can deal with pollution in a much better way we can.
I mean, as a carbon tax, I think like the Australian experience of a carbon tax is actually cap and trade, and I think that's a shit system because it's complex and bureaucratic and stupid,
and designed to become more and more expensive.
Yeah, but I think a carbon tax, like an actual just a flat levy on CO2 emissions, presumably from power stations primarily. I think in terms of like out of the myriad schemes you can go about climate change, like I think that one's not completely insane.
But it's also the least disruptive.
But it's still a massive government intervention in the economy.
Sure. Okay. So, in a real world thing of okay, we need collective action on climate change, which I don't have any strong feelings about the science. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say we need to have collective action. Putting forward a carbon tax is like one of the least bad ideas. So in terms of policy, if you, as opposed to what's going on at the moment, which is like the EPA shutting down coal power plants, and all this other kind of crazy stuff that's going on, like compared to the current situation, is his suggestion a more or less libertarian solution to how the US is going about climate change?
Because
it's probably more libertarian. It's not perfectly libertarian, but it's probably more libertarian.
It's still saying that there's a market failure. That if we were seeing the effects of climate change, that would
that would actually be a market failure. Like that would actually be.
If we saw greater effects, do you think that just the private sector would still do nothing? Do you think ordinary people would sort of say, hey, there's more strange weather happening? Because if you still look at all the polls, it's in Australia, I think it's a majority now are climate skeptics and don't want a carbon tax anymore.
And that can be what it is. Like I'm not saying this is something I would put forward if I was in his position, but like in terms of like if you want to a good Libertarian Party candidate should be somebody who is just pushing the needle in a more libertarian direction, even if it is in a perfectly libertarian direction. And I think scrapping current approaches to climate change that the US government is doing and going for just a straightforward, flat carbon tax on CO2 emissions would be a more libertarian solution. Is it the best of all possibles? Probably not. Is there better things he can spend his time on? Yes, absolutely. But I don't think I think the libertarians have responded by sort of treating him like he's gone off the deep end. I don't think he has actually done that. I think he's... Sure, I think a lot of libertarians probably don't.
It's part of a pattern of behaviour. I mean, the whole bake the cake thing that hasn't gone down well, and the fact I watched one of those.
What was the bake the cake thing?
Well, he supports making Christian bakers bake gay wedding cakes. He's too
I
scared
wasn't
of
aware of
the
this.
freedom
this,
of
this,
association
this was
issues.
in the debates, the LP party debates, where he's just like, just bake the damn cake, and
Actually,
so I mean, like, but like,
that's different from saying that there shouldn't be laws
well,
telling them.
I think he's
But
been
it's
people
a
followed
part
up
of
on
the
it, but he's
behaviour. That's the point I'm making, and also
sure.
picking Bill Weld as his running mate, who is clearly not a libertarian. I mean, that's a
No,
massive mark against
he's
him as well.
well, he's a moderate Republican,
Yeah.
and I
Says he
figured
likes
that
Hillary Clinton. Thinks she's a great public servant.
Well,
in the
Gary Johnson didn't go for the jugular begin with either on either Hillary Clinton or Obama. But I mean, I think in some ways this sort of stuff is minor stuff compared to the big, like the much bigger issues, which is spending, the war on drugs. Like the thing about Gary Johnson is, okay, yeah, some of this stuff.
But Gary Johnson, he doesn't
like,
even want. He doesn't even want to go full legalization. I watched that scene in Town Hall when he said he just wanted to legalize pot, and
that's still a more libertarian. Like that's still a clearly more libertarian position than the status quo. Like that alone, would have the biggest dent on the war of drugs that anybody's done since it started.
The Libertarian Party, a third party which is designed to be pure, is not going to take the proper libertarian approach to all drugs. I mean, you may as well just be in the Republican Party if, you only want to just legalize pot.
Well, the Republicans don't want to legalize pot. They want to keep it
Ron
legal.
Paul said he wanted to legalize all drugs. He was
Ron Paul
Gary Johnson's not going to win.
No, maybe not. But he might come second. In which case, that would be a very strong thing for the libertarians.
Yeah, so
it would push the Republicans away from the Trump school of what the Republican Party should be, and more towards the libertarian. And if the Republican Party presumes to take 2020, I would expect them to become considerably more libertarian.
Well, so the idea of the Libertarian Party now should be just to water down the message as much to attract enough Republicans.
Okay, so here's a question. Let's just bring this into sort of the theoretical realm of libertarianism. Like, Milton Friedman was not an anarchist.
No,
is Milton Friedman
was.
Yeah.
Is Milton Friedman is he a positive? Did he help promote libertarianism?
No, he helped.
He was prominent.
Sorry, he helped promote what he called liberal values. We call him a libertarian because that's the convention for what someone who promotes liberal values is nowadays. And he frequently said that the word liberal is misused in America. Right? That was a view that he would frequently have. Now, here's the thing. Friedman invented the pay-as-you-go tax system.
Yep.
Right? And it's one of the things that he says he regretted. He's done a lot of things. He's created a lot of things that make bureaucracy easier. But at the same time, he's argued, maybe that's not the right way to go.
So essentially, that approach would mean that you get rid of, out of the libertarian movement, we should purge Hayek, we should purge Friedman, we should purge Ayn Rand, who explicitly said she wasn't a libertarian, and she hated anarchists, but, I mean, she was a fruitcake. So basically, in your perspective, the only person that's a libertarian is Murray Rothbard, and everybody else can
Ron Paul was the perfect candidate, and he was able to have a very successful 2008 and 2012 campaign. I mean, and he didn't water down the message, and he attracted, hundreds of thousands of people to the Liberty movement. I mean, before Ron Paul, it was, basically Cato Institute, Mises, and Reason magazine. That was all it was.
Well, which is not a bad thing. I mean, the thing is, there's lots of ways of going about this approach. We don't all have to be like Ron Paul. It doesn't all have to be like Murray Rothbard. It doesn't all have to, the thing is, you don't lose anything. So if Gary Johnson attracts 1% more people to the LP or to the libertarian movement as a whole, that's a win. That's a win.
So if you got 2%,
it's not like people are going to leave the libertarian movement because of Gary Johnson. You can only get more people on board, and not everything has to be done the exact way. Not everybody has to be the same person. Not everybody has to be like anybody else. So Gary Johnson, okay, he's not perfect, but he's good on some issues, not great on others, and I just, it's, as far as I'm concerned, this is just, it's an opportunity to have reach people who otherwise wouldn't give a crap about libertarianism. You know, like he's going to have a reach to a group of people that maybe Ron Paul doesn't. In the same way as Milton Friedman, if you go talk to conservatives about Milton Friedman, they're willing to listen. If you go talk to them about Ayn Rand or Murray Rothbard, they're going to throw you out. Like, and it's the same with Hayek. Like, Hayek is, neither of Hayek or Friedman are perfect libertarians, but they still improved the liberty movement. They still made a massive contribution in terms of bringing people to the ideas of liberty.
So,
but we should probably move on. So, you want the final word, Vikas?
Yeah, so this is one thing that's been pissing me off for a while here, is the idea that Ron Paul is being deified as like this perfect libertarian candidate. And it's not just Tim that I've heard it from. Okay, so Ron Paul's heyday was the 2008 presidential election, guys. That's when he peaked in terms of delegate count, right? It went down in 2012. I loved his performance in 2012 because he got way more airtime than he did in 2008. But he got fewer delegates in 2012 than he did in 2008. And that's something.
Well, that's because the Republican Party did their best to thwart him as much as possible during that time, because they were worried that he could actually win a few primaries.
No, it's because they changed a couple of the primary systems from caucuses, which Ron Paul did very well in, to...
He came third in Iowa.
Anyway, keep going, Vickers.
No, there were a lot of caucus systems which Ron Paul did very well in because he had the candidates, but he didn't do as well in the actual vote, right? But he pulled more delegates because it's a caucus. So, look, Ron Paul's base is much more entrenched into the delegate voting system, specifically caucus voting systems, than in the straight out, proportional voting systems for delegates. And that's why Ron Paul did worse. And that's why Rand Paul has done significantly worse than his son.
Get to the point, Vickers. Come on, get to the point. We're running out of time.
Yeah, sorry. Let's just go to the next topic. My point is, like, he's not that great. He's done well.
Oh my God! You would not. We would not be in the position we are in the Liberty movement, like in 2016, if it wasn't for Ron Paul. I mean, you can't just delete him from libertarian history.
No, I'm not deleting him. I'm just saying he is not the beginning and the end. He's just one guy who made us famous in two presidential elections.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll definitely have to come back to this topic because so we would quickly get to the in some ways, it's probably not something worth talking quickly about. So the Nauru files. So in the last 2 weeks, the Guardian newspaper has published a number of reports which are based on about 2,000 leaked incident reports from the Australian immigration camp Nauru, which is a Pacific island. Essentially, Australia sends all our refugees to there and to Manus Island, which is being shut down in the process of being shut down at the moment. And these reports have quite a number of instances of abuse of children in particular. So the more than half of the reports involve children, and some of it's pretty horrific stuff, like security guards asking for sexual favors from girls.
Well, these are all alleged incidents.
They're all alleged, sure. But it's like the weight of reports means there's probably something going on that's not great.
And they have bothered to record them, which means that, if they really, were covering up all this stuff, then none of this would ever make it to a piece of paper.
Yeah, I don't know if that's of much credit to them if it's still happening. So,
I'm just putting out there my skepticism of just accepting, all of these as true.
Sure, but even if half of them are true, that's still horrific.
I'd say even if one of them is true, that's pretty horrific.
So, there's in the files, there's 7 reports of sexual assault of children, 59 reports of assaults on children, 30 of self-harming of all children, and 159 of threatened self-harm involving children. So that's still a lot of bad stuff going on. even if.
But we know that the asylum seekers, they want to get to Australia by any means necessary. So of course they're going to do all of these things, and they're encouraged by all the refugee activists who go visit there to do all these things. So they're wanting to create this sense of chaos there and oppression.
Yeah,
That's a pretty bold claim. But
yeah, it's. I
I
mean,
don't know.
I'm just saying
I'm
that
not touching that.
it's not just a one-way street of just wicked guards just being horrible to these asylum
That
seekers. I think
look,
it's a two-way
the
street.
guards may not be being horrible at all. I mean, that's why we have investigation processes to determine these things.
Yeah.
It's not for three blokes on a podcast to decide whether all of the cases are true or false. The issue here is primarily the fact that there are claims being made, and what is the process that is being done to either repudiate those claims or investigate them and bring them to justice.
Even before that, I would say part of the problem is that the Australian government has gone out of its way to make it as hard as possible for these claims to even be heard, to even get them out into the public. So,
because they don't want the refugee lobby to be down their throats every week. That's what. That's
terrible.
Why.
I don't necessarily think getting this to public is the priority. And the reason why I don't think that is because court cases tend to happen here where, people, like, particularly involving sexual assault and things like that, the cases are brought before the police make their charge, they arrest the guy, then they start doing the case. It's not necessarily the first point that we want to get out that this guy is now suspected of sexual assault. That is information that comes way later. What I'm interested in is like the entire investigative process and how that's happening, because to me, that's the first part of the puzzle. And if it happens, is it impartial? And also, how thorough is it?
I agree that there should be a proper process of investigation, and if an allegation can be substantiated, then yes, of course, charges should be laid. But the point that I'm also trying to make is this leak to the Guardian, like what the Guardian's reporting of it is politically motivated as well as a campaign to bring everyone there to Australia.
So what if it is? It's not like the Australian when they were commenting on the Julia Gillard's carbon tax were like totally neutral in everything they in their entire approach to the issue. Like it cuts both ways, sure. The Guardian absolutely is a left-wing news outfit. They absolutely want to end offshore detention, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. And I don't think it should be dismissed.
I'm just trying to put some perspective on this. That it's not, just this wicked, evil, Australian government, locking these people up on an island, and
Well, it is actually kind of wicked and evil what they do. Like even the notion that refugees have been cannot come to Australia
alleged
and be kept
refugees.
here. Even alleged refugees. I mean, from a libertarian perspective, it doesn't matter what their reasoning is for wanting to come to Australia. A libertarian perspective says it does not matter. Whatever reason they want to come to Australia, that's a good enough reason. The fact they want to come is
we've
enough.
got a libertarian solution to refugees going on in Europe at the moment, and that's not going too well with what's happening to local populations in places such as Germany, Sweden, France.
I think I've raised this several times before on my Facebook wall, where I've said examples of policing failure or examples of basically bad judgments are not examples of bad immigration. They're actually just examples of systematic problems in that particular system.
Failure to keep up with crimes being committed, is that what you're referring to?
No. I'm saying no, because take Mans Monos, right? The guy was suspected of murder, right? And
was it sexual assault as well?
Sexual assault, sexual assault. There was a litany of things that he could have been charged with, but wasn't because of cultural reasons. Now that is the kind of shit I sit there and go well, hang on, no, you don't suddenly stop policing the law of the land because the person is an immigrant. That's not how it works.
Well, there's been
more terrorists in Australia than just Mad Mourners.
Yeah, but my point
Sure,
is...
so what? And most of them so far, all the people, almost everybody who's been involved in one of these attacks are all, like, second generation... They're like first generation Australians. So, you know, Mad Mourners, okay, he was a refugee, but the kid that shot Curtis Cheng, he was, like, either born in Australia or lived in Australia from a very young age.
Why would you want to, this is what I was saying, why would you want to import more first generation
because
migrants?
there's 500,000 Muslims in Australia, and
you don't import
all bar maybe, you know, 50 of them have been perfectly acceptably fine. You know, maybe some of them are unpleasant people, but more or less, as far as I'm aware of, they mind their business as much as anybody else, and I don't want to see, you know, 499,950 Muslims deported because 50 of them couldn't behave themselves.
I don't think he suggested deportation. But
or, you know, stop any further Muslims from coming in. Yeah. I mean, really, like, the natural consequence of that argument of why would, if all Muslims are terrorists, why would we let more in? Like, the next conclusion is we should get rid of the Muslims that we have here.
This is the argument that you and others like you put forward, that, you know, you just focus on terrorism where there's other, you know, bad aspects of, you know, Muslim culture that's being, you know, imported to Australia, such as, you know, the oppression of women.
In fact, the best place for women who are oppressed by their husbands is to be in Australia, because they can leave their husbands and go somewhere else. If you're in Saudi Arabia, you can't do that. If you're in friggin' Syria, you can't do that. Better than here, where we can actually help them, where they can actually find freedom. I mean, this is the argument why cities are so important in terms of, you know, like, minorities being able to find a safe place to live. Is that, you know, if you're a gay kid in the middle of friggin' nowhere, and, you know, like, your community is homophobic because there's only like 100 of you, the best place for you to go is to go to a city where you can become anonymous, where you can find a group of people who can look after you. So, you know, like, the whole thing is, well, some of them have got bad cultural values, which, I mean, it's hard to say because it's always a collectivist approach, which is always bad. You know, it doesn't stack up. Like, if you want to help women oppressed by Islam, let them come here.
Just to chime in, the women that are oppressed here, right? I would say that the left wing have a lot to answer on this, with because they do end up supporting the institutions that aid in, you know, the oppression of these women. Like, for example, there are mosques here that left-wing people protect, and, you know, basically say, oh, freedom of religion, you know, let them do this. They will refuse to criticize the fact that mosque, like, spouts very, very vile anti-Semitic and, you know, anti-women rhetoric, and encourages social ostracization of women in that community who don't conform to their expectations of how women in Islamic culture are meant to behave. And, like, the reality is we should be calling out that shit. And the political left do have something to answer for that. But that is not a reason to stop immigration. That's a reason to actually have more free speech.
Yeah.
Right? And this is why I get a little bit pissed off when, like, people raise all these examples of bad policing, bad judicial reasoning, really, really bad approaches to free speech, and say that this is all a problem of immigration. No, it's not. It's a representative of a malaise in the systemic political culture of that country. And really, that is the problem that Europe is experiencing. It's that their political culture is so degenerate that they don't really encourage or sort of encourage that Enlightenment values that they used to have.
All right, well, we're actually going to have to stop it there because we're running over time. So maybe we'll come back to this issue again in the near future. So this has been episode 22 of Taking Liberties in Season 3. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back again next week.
Bye.
And remember,